It is gone, Eleanor, all of it. There is no gentle way to say it, so I shall say it plainly, the way your father never could. Your dowry is sold, and the money is spent, and you will go to the Duke this morning, and you will not make a scene. Lady Ashford said it across the breakfast table at 8:30, between the toast and the chocolate, in the tone of a woman remarking on the weather, and Eleanor Ashford set down her cup without a tremor and looked at her stepmother for a long, level moment before she answered. "Say the rest of it," Eleanor said. "You have practiced the first part. Say the rest." For there was a rest. There was always a rest with Lavinia Ashford. Eleanor had lived 7 years under her father's second wife, and had learned to hear the second sentence inside the first. And the second sentence today was that Sophia's debts had come due. Sophia, the stepsister, with her milliners and her card tables and her summer at Brighton, and that there had been £4,000 owing to a gentleman who would not wait. And that Eleanor's 8,000, her mother's settlement, the only thing in the world that was wholly and lawfully hers, had been the nearest water to the fire. The Duke of Ravenscourt holds Sophia's note, her stepmother said, and now the smoothness thinned, and underneath it Eleanor heard, for the first time, a thread of real fear. He has summoned this household to account for it. I am not well enough to travel, and Sophia cannot be seen by such a man in her state, so you will go. You will be civil. You will tell him the debt is being settled and beg his patience, and you will say nothing, Eleanor, of how the money was raised. Do you understand me? If he learns the particulars, we are all finished. Eleanor understood a great deal more than her stepmother intended. She understood, sitting very still with her mother's signet ring cool against her finger, the one inheritance too small to be worth selling, the gold worn thin with 3 generations of her mother's people, that the particulars meant something worse than spending. One does not fear a duke learning that a debt was paid. One fears him learning how, and there was only one, how that turned a stepmother's voice to ash. "You forged it," Eleanor said quietly. "You could not sell my trust without the trustee's hands. Mr. Goring is half blind and you are the other, and you forged old Goring's consent, and you forged mine, because I would never in this life have signed away my mother's settlement to pay for Sophia's gloves." She rose. She did not raise her voice. She had learned, in 7 years, that the people who shouted in that house were the people who lost. "You did not send me to the Duke to beg his patience. You sent me because if anyone is to be caught standing in the wreck, you would rather it were me." Her stepmother's face did the thing Eleanor had been waiting 7 years to see it do. It frightened. "You will say nothing," Lady Ashford whispered. "I will go to the Duke," Eleanor said, "and I will find out what he knows." She turned the ring once on her finger, the old habit, her mother's habit, and went to put on her plainest, straightest gown. The armour of a woman who expects to be humiliated and has decided to be upright about it. That is all I will promise you. It is more than you have ever promised me, she thought, the whole jolting carriage ride to Ravenscourt, that she knew exactly what waited for her there. A cold man behind a large desk. A debt. The slow public peeling away of a family's last respectability. She had braced for it the way she braced for everything, with her spine set and her mother's ring turned inward so the device would not show. She had not braced, there was no possible way to have braced, for what was actually on the desk when the doors opened. The Duke of Ravenscourt rose when she entered, which she had not expected, and he rose with the briefest catch in his movement, a stiffness in the left leg quickly mastered, which told her, against her will because she had come armed to hate him, that he was a man who had been hurt somewhere and had decided not to make it anyone's affair. He was younger than her dread had painted him, perhaps 32, dark-haired, with deep-set eyes the colour of moss under water, and a quietness about him that was not coldness. She had built a tyrant out of the word Duke and the word summons. The man behind the desk did not look at her the way a tyrant looks at a debtor. He looked at her the way a man looks at the end of a very long wait. "Miss Ashford," he said. "Sit, please. You have had a hard morning, and I am afraid the only mercy I can offer is to make the next hour shorter than you are dreading." He did not sit until she did. Then he drew a folded packet of papers from the blotter before him and slid it, unhurried, across the wide desk until it rested under her hand. Read the name at the foot of the second page. She did not trust him. She trusted no one who held a paper out to her. Her stepmother held papers out to her. But she unfolded it, because there was nothing else to do, and she read it. And then she read it again, because the first reading made no sense at all. It was a deed of settlement. It conveyed £8,000 in the 3%, and the freehold of a farm called Mere End in the county of her birth in trust, absolutely and inviolably, to Miss Eleanor Catherine Ashford and her heirs, free of any claim of any other living person. The £8,000 her stepmother had sold 3 weeks ago, the farm her mother had loved. Restored, whole, and at the foot of the second page, where the settler signs, was a signature in a strong plain hand, already dry, already witnessed, Ravenscourt. He had signed it. Before she ever walked through the door, before she knew her dowry was gone, before this morning's breakfast, the Duke of Ravenscourt had bought back the very funds and the very farm her stepmother had stolen, and settled them on her in her own name, and signed his half of it, and left only the line where she might one day sign hers. "I don't." Eleanor's careful voice failed her for the first time in 7 years. "Your Grace, this is not. Why would you?" "Because the money your stepmother sent me to clear Miss Calloway's debt," he said, "arrived with the conveyance that raised it, as such moneys do, and my man of business is a thorough man, and within the hour he had laid before me a sale of a marriage settlement trust, authorised by 2 signatures. One of an attorney named Goring, who I have since established has been blind these 4 years, and cannot have read what he signed, and one of the beneficiary herself, a Miss Eleanor Ashford, dated the 9th of last month." His quiet voice did not change, but something moved far back in the moss-dark eyes. "I have a letter you wrote years ago to my sister. I know your hand, Miss Ashford. The signature on that sale is not it. It is a careful copy made by someone who had seen your name but never watched you write it." He paused. "I have known your dowry was stolen for 3 weeks. You have known for 40 minutes. Forgive me, I have had rather longer to decide what to do about it than you have." Eleanor sat with the impossible deed under her hand and the room tilting gently around her, and asked the only question that mattered, the one that had nothing to do with money. "A letter I wrote to your sister," she said. "Your Grace, I have never in my life had the honour of knowing your sister." And the long wait came up into his face at last, and he told her. He told her about Frances, Lady Frances Ravenscourt, his elder sister, who had been married at 19 to a man twice her age to settle a debt their father had run up at cards. "Sold" was the word he used, plainly, without flinching from it. "My father sold my sister to clear a marker," and who had lived 7 unhappy years in that man's cold house, and died of a fever at 26 that Alexander had always privately. Believed she had simply not troubled to fight. He had been 21 when she died. He had sworn at her graveside, with the particular fury of a young man who has discovered exactly how the world is arranged, and exactly how little he had done to change it, that no woman would ever again be sold to settle an account if it lay within his power to stop it. And 5 years ago, he said, I came on grim business to a house in Hampshire. Your father's house, Miss Ashford. Though I doubt he recalled me, I was nobody's idea of a duke then, only a younger man with a dead sister and a great deal of cold pride. Your father kept me waiting 3 hours in a draughty hall and saw me for 4 minutes. And while I waited, a girl of 17 came and sat with me, not knowing my rank, I think, only seeing that a man was sitting alone and unhappy in her father's hall, and she did not flatter me or fear me or want anything from me at all. She told me that grief was not improved by being born in a cold room, and she fetched me a hot brick for my feet and a glass of her father's good wine without his leave. And she sat with me until I was called, and then she went away, and I never learned which daughter of the house she was. He looked at her. I learned 3 weeks ago. Her name was on a forged deed of sale. I have been a very long time, Miss Ashford, finding out your name. I have had it written at the foot of that settlement for a fortnight, waiting for the morning you would walk through that door so that I might give it back to you myself. The fire ticked in the grate. Somewhere far off in the great house, a clock was striking the half-hour. Eleanor Ashford, who had come to Ravenscourt expecting to be turned away in disgrace, sat with her mother's ring turned inward on her finger, and looked at a man who had carried the memory of one kindness for 5 years, and spent a fortune to repay it, and found that the spine she had set against humiliation was no defence at all against this. You said, she managed, you have been waiting. I have been waiting, the Duke of Ravenscourt agreed, rather longer than you have. For most of it I did not know for what. She should have taken the deed and gone. That was the sensible course, and Eleanor was, above all things, a sensible woman. She had been made sensible by 7 years of a house where sentiment was a thing other people could afford. She should have signed the line, secured her mother's settlement beyond her stepmother's reach forever, thanked the Duke with what dignity she could find, and never come near Ravenscourt again, because a young woman of 22 with no fortune and a forged scandal in her family had no business letting her chest go tight at the sight of a duke who pulled out chairs and remembered hot bricks. She did not sign it. Not that day. I cannot take this, she said, pushing the deed back across the desk, while my stepmother's crime is unanswered. You restored my 8,000 out of your own pocket, Your Grace, and that is the most generous thing anyone has done for me since my mother died, but if I take it and go home, Lavinia Ashford keeps the 4,000 she stole beyond Sophia's debt. Keeps her good name, keeps her place, and does it all again to the next person small enough to rob. A forged trust is a forged trust, whether or not the victim is made whole. I will not be made whole, and leave the forgery standing. She watched him understand her, and she watched him do the thing she had not expected a duke to do, which was to look at her not with indulgence but with respect, as at an equal who had said something he had not thought of and ought to have. You understand, he said slowly, that to prove the forgery is to send your stepmother to a capital court. Forgery is a hanging matter. You would be the one who put the rope in the judge's hand. I understand it better than you do, Eleanor said. She is the only mother my father gave me after my own. I have eaten at her table for 7 years. I am not speaking of this lightly, Your Grace, and I will thank you not to imagine that I am. I am speaking of it because I have learned that the people who do these things rely entirely on the smallness and the shame of the people they do them to. They count on us to take the quiet rescue and slink away grateful. I am tired, and here her voice did, at last, crack, just once, and she let it, because she had decided long ago that she would not be a woman who pretended things did not cost her. I am so tired of being the kind of small that wicked people can count on. He was quiet for a moment. Then he rose, again with that swiftly mastered catch in the leg, and came around the great desk, and did not touch her, though they stood near enough that she could have counted the threads of grey at his temple, near enough that the not touching was its own kind of contact. Then we will not take the quiet rescue, he said. We will do it the loud way, and the lawful way, and I will stand beside you while it is done. But hear me. Eleanor Ashford, her name, her plain Christian name, in his low even voice, and it went through her like the first warm thing after a long cold. The deed is yours, regardless of how this ends. I did not buy back your mother's farm to purchase your gratitude or your company or anything else. I bought it because a man sold his sister once while I was too young to stop him, and I have spent 11 years waiting for a chance to be in the room the next time, and not too late. You have given me the chance. Whatever else you decide, that debt is mine to you, and it is already paid. She did not have an answer for that. She had armoured herself against every weapon her stepmother had taught her to expect, and not one of them was a man who said not too late as though the words cost him blood. They worked the plan together in the evenings of that week, the Duke and the dowerless girl, across the same wide desk where he had first slid the deed to her. And it was in those evenings that the trouble of the heart caught up with the trouble of the law. He sent to Hampshire for Bessie and the locked box. She taught him the custom of the seal, pressing her mother's ring into a candle's drip again and again, so he would know the true mark when the false one was laid beside it. They argued, she was glad to find they could argue, that he did not fold the moment she pushed, over whether to spare old Goring the shame of the witness box, and she won, because she was right, and he told her so without sulking, which she had not known a proud man could do. And one night, late, the candles burned to stubs, and the house gone quiet around them. She leaned across the desk to set the warmed wax true, and he leaned to steady the paper, and they arrived, both of them, at the same 6 inches of air at the same moment, and neither drew back. You should go up, he said, not moving. It is past 1. People will talk. People are already talking, Eleanor said, not moving either. You heard what they say I am. A schemer who sold her own dowry to catch a duke. The ring was warm in her fingers, his face was very near, the firelight in the moss-dark eyes, the grey at his temple, the long-held quiet of him. If I were the schemer they describe, Your Grace, this would be the moment I had worked the whole month toward. And are you? His voice had gone low and rough. No, she whispered, that is rather the trouble. I have no scheme at all for this part. I did not plan for you. His hand came up, slow, careful, the burned scar hand she had noticed that first morning, and did not quite touch her jaw, hovered close enough that she felt the warmth come off it, and her breath went shallow, and the whole tired length of her bent toward that warmth, like a plant toward a window, and his head lowered, and the 6 inches became 3, became less, a floorboard creaked in the corridor, a footman's tread, a banked fire round. They came apart as though the desk between them had caught fire. Eleanor stood with her heart going like a hare's, and the wax cooling unstamped in her hand, and the Duke turned to the window with his jaw set. And for a moment neither of them could find a single sensible word in a room that had just been full of the most dangerous, unsensible ones. Tomorrow, he said at last, hoarse, to the dark glass. We finish the plan tomorrow. Tomorrow, she agreed, and fled, and did not sleep, and was furious at herself the whole night for the one thing she had armoured against everyone but him, that she had wanted, more than safety, more than vindication, more than her mother's farm, to close those last 3 inches. The reckoning was set for 10 days hence, and in those 10 days the thing happened that careful people never quite forgive themselves for not preventing. Lavinia Ashford, cornered, stopped being afraid and started being clever. She could not unsell the dowry, the Duke had it. She could not silence Eleanor, the girl had slipped her leash. So she did the one thing that might yet save her neck. She changed the shape of the crime. If she could not deny that Eleanor's trust had been sold, she would make it so that Eleanor had sold it. A daughter of age may dispose of her own settlement. It is only forgery if the hand is not her own. And so Lady Ashford produced, in the week before the hearing, a second document, a deed of sale bearing Eleanor's signature, freely given, witnessed by Sophia, in which Miss Eleanor Ashford willingly conveyed her dowry to clear her beloved stepsister's debt out of family affection. And she let it be known, in the right drawing-rooms, in the soft poisonous way she did everything, that the whole sad business was simpler than it looked, that poor plain Eleanor had thrown away her own fortune in a desperate scheme to make herself interesting to the Duke of Ravenscourt, had sold her dowry and then come crying forgery to his very door to snare a rich husband with a tale of woe. A penniless girl who entraps a duke with a sob story. The ton loved nothing better. It very nearly worked. That was the part Eleanor would remember longest, how close the lie came. By the morning of the hearing, half the county believed it. She felt it in the inn at Ravenscourt, where she was lodged, in the way the landlord's wife stopped meeting her eye. In a cut letter from a girl she had thought a friend. She had stepped out of smallness into the light, exactly as she had wanted, and the light had been waiting with a knife. And worse, far worse, was the hour she could not stop herself imagining, the Duke hearing it. The Duke, who had built his faith in her on one letter and one memory of a kindness in a cold hall, being told by everyone he knew that the plain girl had played him for a fortune from the first. He sent for her the night before the hearing. She climbed to his study with her heart in her shoes and the forged second deed already a noose around the throat of everything, and she found him standing at the dark window with the firelight on the hard line of his jaw, and she made herself say it before he could, because she would not be a woman who waited to be accused. You have heard what they are saying, that I sold it myself, that I came here to trap you. She lifted her chin. I cannot prove a memory, Your Grace. I cannot prove I sat with you in a hall 5 years ago, or that I did not scheme my way to your desk. If you have begun to wonder whether you have been a fool, say so now to my face, and I will go, and you may keep your deed and your faith both, and I will not blame you for either. He turned from the window, and the look on his face was not doubt. Stop, he said quietly. Stop standing in my study braced to be struck. I have spent my whole life among people who lie beautifully, Eleanor. I buried a sister killed by a beautiful lie. I know the sound of one. That is not the sound you make. He crossed the room to her. I did not send for you to accuse you. I sent for you because you are about to walk into a room where everyone will, and I wanted you to have one place to stand first where no one does. Now, stop telling me what I am entitled to think of you, and tell me instead what you mean to do tomorrow, because I have watched you for 10 days, and I do not believe for one moment that you came here without a plan of your own. And Eleanor Ashford, who had been bracing to be turned away her whole life, and was learning, very late and all at once, that she need not, felt the fear go out of her, and something colder and brighter come in to take its place. No, she said. I did not come without a plan. Sit down, Your Grace. You restored the money. Let me show you how I am going to restore the truth. The hearing was held in the long gallery at Ravenscourt before a magistrate, 2 solicitors, the blind and trembling Mr. Goring led in on his clerk's arm, and as many of the county's curious as could contrive an excuse to attend, for Lavinia Ashford had made certain the room would be full, believing a full room was her ally. A scandal needs witnesses, and she had invited her own. She had not reckoned on Eleanor inviting one of hers. The forged second deed was produced, and it was good. Eleanor would give her that, looking at it, her own name copied in a fair imitation of her hand, Sophia's frightened signature beneath it as witness. The magistrate examined it. The stepmother's hired man spoke smoothly of a daughter's free affection and a fortune freely given. And Eleanor let him finish. She had learned the value of letting wicked people reach the very end of their sentences before she answered. Then she rose, and she did 3 things. She laid beside the forged deed her mother's original marriage settlement, fetched from a locked box in Hampshire by old Bessie, her mother's nurse, and then her own, who had kept it safe for 12 years against exactly such a day, and who now stood at the back of the gallery in her good black gown, with her chin up like a duchess. The settlement bore, beside her mother's signature, the press of a seal, the worn device of the family signet, 3 generations old. She laid beside it the deed of trust Mr. Goring had genuinely witnessed years before, and beside her own true signature there, again the same seal, pressed in red wax. My mother taught me, Eleanor said into the silent gallery, that a name may be copied by anyone with a steady hand, but that a woman of our family seals what she signs, as her mother did, and hers. I have never in my life put my name to a document of consequence without setting my mother's seal beside it. It is the one habit she left me that no one could sell. She turned to the forged deed, her name in a stranger's careful copy, and beside it, nothing, no seal. A blot where the forger, not knowing the custom, had not known to look for it. Whoever wrote my name on this paper had seen my signature. They had never seen me sign. And then she took her mother's signet ring from her finger, the small worn inheritance too cheap to steal, turned inward all her life so the device would not show, and she pressed it into the soft wax the magistrate's clerk warmed for her, and she set the true seal beside the false document. And the whole gallery leaned in to see, and there was no possible mistaking the one for the other. The real device, sharp and particular. The forged deed, naked beside it. The hand on that sale is not mine, Eleanor said, and the seal is on neither that one nor on old Mr. Goring's consent, because the woman who forged them both did not know to make it. Her name is Lady Ashford. She is my father's widow. She sold my mother's settlement to pay her own daughter's debts, and when she was found out, she forged my hand a second time to call me the thief, and she filled this room with witnesses to watch her do it. She looked, at last, directly at her stepmother, who had gone the grey of old ash. You were right about one thing, Lavinia. You said if the Duke learned the particulars we were all finished. You only mistook which of us. The gallery did not erupt. It did something quieter and more terrible. It fell entirely silent, the whole curious, gossiping, knife-bright room that had come to watch a plain girl exposed, every laughing mouth in it shut at once. And into that silence the magistrate reached out and drew the forged deed toward him, and the blind old solicitor Goring began, thinly, to weep, and Lavinia Ashford understood, a heartbeat too late, that she had assembled her own jury and convicted herself in front of it. Through the whole of it the Duke of Ravenscourt had not said a word. He had stood at the side of the gallery and let her do it, let her execute the reckoning with her own hand and her mother's seal, claiming none of it. Because he had understood, perhaps before she had, that a woman tired of being the kind of small that wicked people count on does not need to be rescued in front of a crowd. She needs to be witnessed. And he had given her the one thing his rank could buy that his money could not, a room full of the county's eyes, and himself among them, watching her win. Only when it was finished, when the magistrate had taken charge of the deeds, and Lavinia Ashford had been led white and silent from the gallery, did he come to her through the murmuring room, and stop before her, and say low enough that it was for her alone, "I told you the deed was yours, regardless. I find I have something further to ask, and I had rather ask it now, in this room, where you have just proved you need no one's protection, so that you can never mistake it for rescue." He did not kneel, the bad leg perhaps, or perhaps he simply knew her too well by then to offer her a man at her feet, when what she had earned was a man at her side. "Sign the settlement, Eleanor, and then, if you find you wish to, not for the farm, not for the 8,000, not for safety, all of which are already yours and yours alone, marry the man who has been waiting 5 years to be in the room on time. I have made a poor case of it. I have been making it badly since you walked in. But I have never in my life wanted anything the way I want the right to stand beside you the next time some part of the world tries to make you small." Eleanor Ashford looked up at him in the long gallery, with her mother's ring warm again on her finger, and the false deed in the magistrate's hands, and 7 years of bracing finally setting down off her shoulders, and she did not say yes at once, because she was a sensible woman. She said, "Ask me the second part again somewhere that is not a courtroom, Your Grace, and I will give you an answer you will like." And the corner of her mouth moved, for the first time in his sight, into something that was almost a smile. "But I will sign the first part now. I have a seal for it." She married him in the spring, at the little church near Mere End, with her mother's farm green around them, and old Bessie weeping happily in the front pew in her good black gown. Lavinia Ashford was not hanged. Eleanor, in the end, could not put the rope in the judge's hand, and she discovered that the choosing of mercy, freely, by the one person entitled to demand justice, was its own kind of power, and a cleaner one than vengeance. The forgery charge was held over her stepmother's head on the condition that she remove herself entirely, to a cottage in the furthest north. On a small fixed allowance the new Duchess settled on her, stripped of the management of any person's money but her own, never to come within 50 miles of Mere End or Ravenscourt again. Sophia Calloway, who had wept through the whole hearing and who had, Eleanor came to believe, been nearly as much her mother's victim as anyone, was given a modest portion and a fresh start in a town where no one knew the name, and wrote, twice a year, letters of awkward and genuine gratitude that Eleanor always answered. The signet ring Eleanor wore device out now. That was the small change her husband noticed first and loved most, that the worn gold seal she had hidden against her palm her whole life, the one inheritance too cheap to steal, turned outward now for anyone to see, because the woman who wore it had stopped expecting to be robbed. And on a green morning at Mere End the next year, with the farm her mother had loved, sounded all around them, and a settlement in her own sole name, locked in a box only she held the key to. The Duke of Ravenscourt found his wife at the window, sealing a letter with her mother's ring, the red wax bright, the device sharp and particular and entirely her own. "To Sophia?" he asked. "To Sophia," she said. "I tell her every spring that the farm is well. She likes to know something held." She pressed the seal and lifted it, and looked at the clean mark of it, and then at the man who had bought back her stolen dowry before he had ever heard her speak, and then stood at the side of a room and let her save herself. You know, Eleanor said, I spent the whole carriage ride here that first morning deciding exactly how I would hold my head while you turned me away. And instead, he said, I had been waiting, and instead, she agreed, and set the ring against the wax once more, sealing the thing shut with her own hand. In her own name, the way her mother had taught her, you had been waiting.